Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Naitram Ramnanan. Everyone calls me Bob, and I'm the CABI representative for Caribbean and Central America. I got up at 2 a.m. and I see the numbers are now falling off, so I'll try and stick within your 10-minute timeline and try and do this very quickly. This project or case study is not as big project like some of the others that were gone before me, but basically it was a capacity building for managing citrus greening in the Caribbean with some experts from Brazil. And I think it was really a good exercise in showing what is possible, because some of the experiences explained before in Indonesia, for example, and Papua New Guinea is a little bit similar to the Caribbean. And it shows how difficult it is to get an area-wide management system going. And this is exactly what they did in Brazil very efficiently. So the capacity is for the Caribbean to monitor and manage citrus greening disease and its vector. Citrus greening is now widely distributed in the Caribbean. It first came in the early 2000s. And when we did the training workshop webinar during the pandemic, so it was virtual, October 2020, it was virtually in all the countries with the exception of Ghana. Now it is present in Ghana and in the very small UK overseas territories where very little citrus is grown, it's not there. It has been very devastating in terms of the countries where you had commercial orchards, for example, Belize, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Dominica. Some of the strategic partners was the CABI offices in Trinidad, Costa Rica, Brazil, Fund de Citrus, which is a fund for citrus protection, and the Association of Citrus Growers and Juice Manufacturers in the state of Sao Paulo in Brazil, and the University of Sao Paulo, which had extensive biological control program, and the Ministries of Agriculture in Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and Dominican and Jamaica. So this strategic partnership was important because citrus greening is widespread in Brazil. However, 6 out of 10 glasses of citrus juice drunk globally originates in Brazil. And that, to my mind, is a testament of their success of managing this disease. Citrus is important to the Brazilian economy, accounting for over 200,000 jobs, and is the 7th most important farm produce to be exported out of Sao Paulo. So alone, 20% of this comes from Sao Paulo, and 41.3 million trees are infected, resulting in losses of 44 million boxes of infected fruits being left on the ground annually. However, over 10,000 citrus farmers work with Fund de Citrus to conduct research to determine the best management strategies for this debilitating disease. Their success led to the dominance of the Brazilian exports globally, as I mentioned before. So the farmer participation and coordination is key, and with a successful organization as Fund de Citrus is important. So what we did was a 3-hour session every Tuesday in October 2020. We advertised the webinar widely through the Caribbean Plant Health Directors Forum and the CABI member countries, and we had an average of 125 persons attending the 4 sessions. So I would skip some of those minor details. So the key lessons that were shared by our Brazilian experts is how they successfully managed the disease in Brazil is, as was mentioned before, use of clean planting material, resistant cultivars for some types, good crop nutrition, frequent replanting, and in Brazil, this was key. On average, 5 to 8 years, they replaced the trees, and a Solid Alert system, which was very extensive. And this produced heat maps that advise on the various control strategies with good extension and communication. Then you have the key vector control strategies, which is the release of the tamarexia, and they were releasing over 100,000 per month. This was extremely important in controlling the vector in backyards and abandoned groves and in urban areas, as was mentioned by some of the presenters this evening rather, and several biopesticides that were also mentioned were very effective in terms of controlling the disease in this wide area. And of course, they use chemical controls at appropriate time. One of the key success factors they've demonstrated is that if just a few citrus and mariah trees can host many infected psyllids that can cause severe epidemics in the commercial orchard. And this is a strong partnership among neighboring growers to eliminate external sources of the inoculum by removing these trees. So a little summary of what is happening in the Caribbean. The same kind of strategies as was mentioned this evening, was also mentioned in Brazil. But the key difference in the Caribbean is we don't have that area-wide management strategy, and that is partly due to the poor organization of the farmers. I think that is a key critical factor that needs to be in place if we're going to have to manage this disease successfully as they did in Brazil. So as you see, it started coming in the early 2000s, and by now it's spread throughout the entire Caribbean. This distribution in the countries are widespread. All the countries are doing some sort of vector control, certified plants, removal of infected and wild host plants. I don't think much wild hosts are being removed in the Caribbean, maybe just infected plants on commercial orchards, and very little is happening at the backyard situation. People would just leave their trees to die and just rot away, sort of thing. And the ministries promote good nutrition and control of other diseases such as tristeza, etc. So a key takeaway from the Brazil experience is since the introduction of the citrus screening in 2005 to Brazil, a lot of research has been conducted in an integrated approach to managing the disease. This ranges from the use of safe pesticide to manage the vector, to the use of biological control agents to reduce the levels of the vector and consequently the number of trees infected. They have developed an effective vector alert program that identifies when chemical control should be applied. They have effectively utilized biopesticides to control the vector as well as predator insects with great success. They have developed rapid assessments to detect and remove infected trees. Between 2010 and 2015, almost 56 million infected trees were removed and utilized by restaurants as fuel. Most importantly, they have found that they must remove infected citrus plants outside of their farms and apply biopesticides and natural enemies to control the vector outside of the farms to reduce the infection levels on the farm. The Caribbean participants appreciated this learning firsthand and how well this was all done in the Brazil thing. Recommendations for the Caribbean is with limited resources in each individual small island, it was not possible to adopt some of the successful strategies employed in Brazil. The Caribbean must therefore adopt a regional approach with rearing facilities for producing parasitoid and bioinsecticides set up to serve the entire region. And the Caribbean need to replant trees more frequently using clean certified planting material. The Caribbean needs to examine the role of host plants and abandoned fields in the spread of the citrus greening. So the training did prove pre and post assessment did show that it had the general knowledge of the participants were improved, and the general consensus was that biological control was not sustainable on small farms that are present in the Caribbean, and this attitude was significantly changed as a result of the intense discussion with Brazilian experts that urged Caribbean islands to better organize to operate as one or more large farms per country to successfully adopt biological control as a major tool to successfully manage the citrus screening. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't go too long.
Bob, you didn't go too long, and that was actually fantastic. And we're going to just do 5 minutes, so don't worry. We haven't really slipped in numbers that much at all, so don't feel panicked. But I've got a quick 5 questions for you, and that was fantastic. For the parasitoids, that sounds really interesting. Do you know what the cost is of that? Is it costly? Would it be something that you think is able to be done within the Caribbean islands?
In the case of Dominica, they did release about 78,000, I think. Okay. But in terms of the actual cost of it, I'm not quite sure. In Jamaica, it came on its own. They're not sure how it arrived, but it came on its own. And in the case of Dominica, I think it is still doing a pretty good job. But in terms of the actual cost, no, I don't have that data with me. I can try and find it out. But the experience in Brazil showed that it was far more cost effective than the chemicals. And the collaboration with large numbers of farmers and farms. The farms in Brazil are huge compared to what we have in the Caribbean. So it was definitely very cost effective there.
Yeah, no, there'd be a question as well, whether it's in smaller sort of backyard farms or smaller farms, whether it's still cost effective. But that's something that would be really interested in, because I'm sure it would be great to sort of look at that within this region. A question here, you said you showed us that it had spread across the Caribbean. Is that mostly through trade?
Yes, basically we do have trading fresh produce, and in another project, which is my real focus, it's invasive species. Commodities are traded within the islands of the Caribbean. Virtually, they're packaged in a way that insects could move in and out. They're transported on ships and schooners that are basically open. They're not in sealed containers. And then they arrive in ports where they're inspected in the open and that sort of thing. So the biosecurity is very lax, and that's the experience. Once an invasive species enters the Caribbean, it gets spread around very quickly to all the countries.
Okay, excellent, thanks. Another question I have, and I've got lots here, is it hard to convince farmers? I mean, you talked about the impact of training, which was fantastic, showing the raising of awareness, but is it hard to convince farmers across these island countries to destroy plants? If that is one of the management tactics that you pointed out was very successful in Brazil. But is that hard to convince a small farmer in one of these countries?
I'm not quite sure how hard it is to convince backyard farmers, but farmers are reluctant in general to destroy plants. So for example, I worked on Christophine, and in one of the diseases that is very prevalent here, also prevalent in Costa Rica, and they replace their Christophine vines every year. In Trinidad, they leave a vine for about 20 years. And that's one of the significant contribution of this disease. Similarly, citrus, for Trinidad in particular, the groves are very old. People just don't like to replace trees.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's very interesting.
And Brazil, I think that was one of the key strategies. That were replacing trees that were still even producing fairly well. I noticed in Indonesia and so on, they mentioned also people still harvesting from infected trees. But in Brazil, it was a deliberate strategy to replace trees very early, 8 years after coming into production on average, sort of thing.
Yeah, excellent, great, thank you. That's very interesting. One more question, and then I'll close it. But you mentioned a number of bioinsecticides, and you said they were very effective from the Brazilian experience. Is there any one in particular? I see you had Bovaria bassiana, for example, as one example. But is there one that's more effective than the other that they have found? And management?
I suspect Bavaria is that one, but I'm not an expert and I don't want to answer that one. I can consult with my Yelitsa, who is in closer contact with the Brazilian colleagues, and get that back for you.
Fantastic.
But I think all three were used.
Yeah.
But I
Great.
can't say which was more effective. Yeah.
No, thanks, Bob, and thank you very much for that presentation. It was a really nice way to leave it, and it's great to draw on that experience in Brazil, because they've obviously had a very proactive strategy there, and they've had quite a lot of success. And so it's really interesting to see, and I think some of the experiences in the Caribbean there with managing it would be of real interest to smallholder farmers across Southeast Asia, but also in the Pacific, and we had quite a few people from the Pacific Island countries joining this webinar. So we'll invite you back, and not at such a terrible time for you next time, I promise. But thank you so much.
Thank you very much. But I think this case study re-emphasized what I always say: for successful agriculture to happen, you have to have good climate, good soil, good collaboration of farmers, researchers, and extensionists. And I think this was classic in the case of Brazil.